The cruelest words are often spoken by people who never realize they are destroying the best thing they will ever have. Vanessa Brooks stopped walking the instant she heard her name drifting through the half-open library doors of the Castellano estate. The silver tray in her hands suddenly felt twice as heavy, though she refused to let it shake. She had spent the last 6 months mastering the art of silence, learning how to move through marble hallways without being noticed, serving elegant dinners beneath crystal chandeliers, and disappearing before wealthy guests even realized she had entered the room. Tonight was supposed to be no different. The mansion glowed beneath warm golden lights as business partners, politicians, and longtime family friends gathered for one of Adrian Castellano's private celebrations. Expensive laughter echoed across polished stone floors while a jazz trio performed softly near the grand staircase. Vanessa had polished every wine glass herself that afternoon, arranged fresh white roses across every table, and made certain the evening appeared effortless. She believed good work should never call attention to itself. Then she heard his voice. It belonged to Ryan Sullivan, the man she had quietly loved for almost a year. He worked as one of Adrian's financial consultants, and unlike many of the wealthy guests, he had always greeted Vanessa with a smile. He remembered her birthday, asked about her grandmother's health, and occasionally stayed behind after meetings just long enough to make her believe their conversations meant something more. Vanessa had never expected promises. She had only hoped kindness might someday become love. She remained hidden behind the doorway as Ryan laughed softly with several guests. Someone asked him why he had never introduced the beautiful maid everyone seemed to notice. Ryan answered without hesitation. "She is sweet," he said casually, lifting his glass. "But let us be realistic. She is a black maid. She is not the woman I would ever marry. Dating someone like her would be one thing. Marriage is completely different." The room filled with uncomfortable chuckles. Vanessa felt every word settle into her heart with unbearable weight. She did not cry. She did not storm into the room. She simply lowered her eyes and tightened her grip on the silver tray until her fingertips turned pale. At the opposite end of the library, standing near the fireplace where the conversation had begun, Adrian Castellano heard every word. The white mafia boss had built an empire by reading people more carefully than they read themselves. His sharp blue eyes shifted quietly from Ryan's confident smile to the hallway, where Vanessa stood frozen, believing no one had seen her. Adrian noticed the pain she fought so hard to hide. She straightened her shoulders, took one slow breath, and continued walking exactly as she had been taught, carrying the tray through the hallway with quiet dignity instead of humiliation. That silent decision impressed Adrian more than any speech ever could. As Vanessa disappeared toward the service corridor, another man entered the library through the front entrance. Ethan Romano, Adrian's oldest friend, greeted the room with an easy smile before his eyes briefly followed the young black maid leaving the hallway. He noticed the sadness she tried so carefully to conceal. Adrian noticed it too. Neither man said a word, but neither of them would forget what they had just witnessed. And before this story reached its end, the man who believed Vanessa was never good enough would discover that the greatest mistake of his life had not been rejecting a maid. It had been failing to recognize the extraordinary woman standing right in front of him. The next morning arrived with the quiet elegance that always surrounded the Castellano estate. Golden sunlight spilled across polished marble floors, reflecting against towering windows that overlooked perfectly trimmed gardens stretching for acres beyond the mansion. By 6 o'clock, Vanessa Brooks had already finished arranging fresh white orchids in the main entrance, prepared breakfast trays for overnight guests, and carefully polished the grand piano that stood beneath the sweeping staircase. She moved with practiced grace, never rushing, never complaining, and never expecting anyone to notice. That was how she had learned to survive. Invisible people were rarely judged until someone finally decided to look at them. 6 months earlier, Vanessa had accepted the housekeeping position after leaving a small hotel outside Philadelphia where she had worked double shifts simply to keep up with rent and her grandmother's medical bills. The Castellano estate offered better pay, health insurance, and a chance to build a future that did not depend on constant worry. Mrs. Evelyn Brooks, the head housekeeper, had welcomed her with one simple rule: treat every room with respect, because people reveal who they are by how they care for the places they live. Vanessa had never forgotten those words. She dusted family photographs with the same care she used for priceless sculptures. She greeted every gardener by name. She always prepared an extra breakfast plate for the elderly groundskeeper who arrived before dawn. When a dishwasher broke in the kitchen, she quietly stayed 2 hours after her shift ended to help wash every plate by hand without asking for overtime. Nobody told her to do it. She simply believed kindness should not require permission. Adrian Castellano noticed these small things long before anyone else did. Walking through the mansion each morning with a cup of black coffee in his hand, he observed details other people ignored. Fresh flowers always appeared before important meetings. His late mother's favorite reading chair was somehow kept spotless every day, even though no one ever used it. Staff members smiled more when Vanessa worked nearby. The atmosphere changed because of her, yet she never tried to become the center of attention. Adrian found that unusual. In his world, many people worked hard only when someone important was watching. Vanessa worked the same way whether she was completely alone or standing in a room filled with influential guests. One rainy afternoon, he watched through the library windows as she offered her own umbrella to a delivery driver whose hands were full of heavy boxes. She walked back through the rain without hesitation, her uniform soaked but her expression peaceful. She never mentioned the moment afterward. She simply changed into a dry apron and continued setting the dining room exactly on schedule. That quiet integrity stayed with Adrian far longer than any expensive speech he had heard in a boardroom. Vanessa believed she had mastered the art of remaining unseen, yet someone else had begun noticing her as well. Ethan Romano visited the estate almost every Friday evening to meet Adrian before their weekly dinner. Unlike most guests, Ethan greeted every employee with genuine warmth instead of polite indifference. One evening, as Vanessa carefully placed fresh coffee on the terrace table, Ethan looked up from his conversation and smiled. "Good evening, Miss Brooks. I hope your grandmother is feeling better." Vanessa paused for just a second, surprised that he remembered a conversation they had shared nearly 2 months earlier. She smiled politely before continuing her work, unaware that a simple act of being remembered would quietly begin changing the direction of her life, while another man was preparing to lose the greatest opportunity he had never truly appreciated. 3 days passed after the party, yet Vanessa could still hear Ryan's careless words every time she walked through the quiet corridors of the estate. She did not avoid her work, and she certainly did not avoid him. Instead, she greeted him with the same polite smile she offered every guest, proving to herself that dignity was stronger than disappointment. Mrs. Evelyn Brooks noticed the change immediately. Vanessa laughed a little less during breakfast preparations, hummed fewer songs while arranging flowers, and spent her lunch breaks reading quietly beneath the old maple tree instead of chatting with the kitchen staff. No one asked questions because everyone understood that some wounds needed silence before they needed conversation. Ethan Romano returned to the mansion that Friday afternoon carrying a box of pastries from a small family bakery across town, something he did every few weeks simply because the kitchen staff loved them. Unlike many wealthy visitors, Ethan always entered through the service entrance first to greet the employees before joining Adrian upstairs. He believed respect should never depend on someone's job title. As he stepped into the bright kitchen filled with the comforting smell of fresh bread and brewed coffee, he noticed Vanessa carefully decorating a birthday cake for one of the gardeners who had worked on the estate for nearly 30 years. She had spent her own lunch break writing a simple message in elegant lettering across the frosting. Ethan watched quietly for a moment before smiling. "That looks better than anything I could buy in Manhattan," he said warmly. Vanessa looked up, surprised by his familiar voice. "Thank you, sir." Ethan laughed softly. "I have asked you 3 times to call me Ethan." A faint smile appeared across her face for the first time in days. "Old habits are difficult to change." "The best habits usually are," he replied. Their conversation lasted only a few minutes, yet it felt strangely effortless. Ethan asked about her grandmother's latest doctor's appointment because he genuinely remembered the date. Vanessa admitted the medicine seemed to be helping, and gratitude softened her eyes. No expensive gift had ever meant as much as someone remembering something so personal. Adrian happened to walk into the kitchen just as Ethan handed Vanessa a paper bag containing an extra blueberry muffin. "You skipped lunch last week," Ethan said casually. "I figured you would probably do it again." Vanessa looked genuinely surprised. "You remembered that too?" People deserve to be remembered, Ethan answered simply. Adrian remained silent, watching the exchange unfold. There was no flirtation, no dramatic gesture, and no hidden agenda. It was nothing more than one person treating another with ordinary kindness. Yet Adrian noticed something Ryan had never seemed to understand. Ethan never spoke to Vanessa as though she were beneath him. He looked directly into her eyes, listened without interrupting, and thanked her every time she brought him coffee or cleared away empty dishes. To Ethan, she was never just the maid. She was Vanessa Brooks, a thoughtful woman with dreams, responsibilities, and quiet strength. As Ethan prepared to leave the kitchen, he turned back with an easy smile. There is a community book fair downtown tomorrow. My niece canceled on me at the last minute. If you happen to be free after work, you would be doing me a favor by helping me choose books for her. Vanessa hesitated, uncertain whether she had heard correctly. Before she could answer, Ethan added gently, "No pressure. I simply enjoy good company." Standing silently in the doorway, Adrian watched the surprise on Vanessa's face. It was not the expression of someone falling in love. It was the expression of a woman experiencing something she had almost forgotten existed. She was being seen. Vanessa stood in front of her small apartment mirror that Saturday afternoon, holding two dresses she rarely had the chance to wear. Neither one was expensive. One was a simple navy blue cotton dress she had bought on clearance nearly 3 years earlier. The other was a cream-colored dress her grandmother had given her before moving into assisted living. She finally chose the cream dress because it reminded her of home rather than hope. She was not preparing for a romantic date. At least that was what she kept telling herself. Ethan had invited her to help choose children's books, nothing more. Still, she found herself smoothing invisible wrinkles from the fabric before leaving for the subway. Downtown Manhattan buzzed with weekend energy as families, students, and tourists wandered through the annual community book fair. Bright banners fluttered in the gentle breeze, while local musicians filled the sidewalks with soft acoustic melodies. Food trucks lined the nearby streets, filling the air with the comforting scent of fresh coffee and warm pastries. Vanessa spotted Ethan waiting beside the entrance exactly on time, holding 2 paper cups of hot chocolate instead of coffee. "I remembered you do not like bitter drinks," he said with an easy smile as he handed one to her. Vanessa looked at him with quiet surprise. "You remember a lot of things." Ethan shrugged lightly. "People remember what matters to them." The words settled gently into her heart, not because they sounded dramatic, but because they sounded honest. They spent the afternoon browsing colorful shelves filled with children's stories, classic novels, and local authors. Ethan laughed as Vanessa carefully explained why one adventure book would encourage imagination while another might help a shy child build confidence. He listened to every opinion without pretending to know better. For the first time in months, Vanessa forgot about polished marble floors, silver serving trays, and the quiet loneliness she carried through the mansion every day. She simply enjoyed being treated like an equal. Meanwhile, several blocks away, Ryan Sullivan happened to leave a business luncheon with 2 colleagues when he glanced across the street and froze. Through the large windows of the bookstore cafe, he saw Vanessa laughing softly as Ethan held open the door for her while balancing a stack of books under one arm. There was nothing improper about the scene. No extravagant gifts. No dramatic embrace. Just 2 people enjoying each other's company with genuine ease. Yet something inside Ryan tightened unexpectedly. One of his co-workers noticed where he was looking. "Is that Adrian Castellano's best friend?" the man asked casually. Ryan nodded without answering. "Interesting," his colleague continued. "Looks like he enjoys spending time with the young woman from the estate." Ryan forced a small smile, but the conversation he had dismissed only days earlier suddenly echoed inside his mind. He had believed Vanessa would always be there, quietly moving through the mansion as though her life existed only around everyone else's. Watching her smile now, he realized he had never once asked what dreams she carried beyond those walls. Back at the estate that evening, Adrian listened quietly as Ethan described the afternoon over a game of chess. "She recommended books for my niece that I never would have chosen," Ethan said. "She has this way of understanding people after only a few minutes." Adrian moved one chess piece across the board before looking up with a thoughtful expression. "I have known that for months," he replied calmly. "The difference is that you took the time to let her show you." Ethan smiled, but said nothing. Outside the study windows, The evening sun dipped below the gardens, casting long golden shadows across the mansion. Somewhere downstairs, Vanessa quietly folded fresh linens for the guest rooms, completely unaware that the simple decision to choose herself instead of chasing someone else's approval had already begun changing every future that once seemed impossible. Monday morning brought unexpected whispers to every corner of the Castellano estate. Housekeepers exchanged curious glances while preparing guest suites. Gardeners spoke quietly over fresh flower beds, and the kitchen staff smiled whenever Ethan Romano's name surfaced in conversation. No one had seen anything inappropriate. They had simply noticed something unusual. The wealthy businessman who rarely remembered anyone's name had begun asking whether Vanessa had eaten lunch, whether her grandmother was feeling stronger, and whether she needed a ride home after late evening events. The attention was gentle rather than dramatic, but kindness has a way of becoming the loudest rumor in any quiet place. Vanessa tried to ignore the growing curiosity around her. She continued arriving before sunrise, preparing breakfast trays with the same care as always, and making certain every guest room looked untouched by human hands. She reminded herself that Ethan had never promised anything beyond friendship. That was enough. More than enough. Being respected had already changed something inside her that she could never allow another person to take away again. One afternoon, Ethan arrived carrying a small paper bag from the neighborhood bakery. Instead of bringing expensive gifts, he placed a warm cinnamon roll on the kitchen counter beside Vanessa's workstation. "My niece insisted I bring you one," he said with a smile. "She still talks about the books you helped us choose." Vanessa laughed softly. "Tell her I hope she enjoys every story." Ethan leaned against the counter comfortably. "She already asked when you were coming to our next bookstore trip." Before Vanessa could answer, Ryan entered the kitchen looking for Adrian. His confident expression faltered for just a second as he noticed Ethan and Vanessa laughing together over something written inside a children's book catalog. Ethan greeted him politely. Vanessa did the same, offering the same respectful smile she gave every guest. There was no bitterness in her voice, no attempt to make Ryan uncomfortable. Somehow that hurt him more than anger would have. He had expected distance. Instead, he was treated with quiet grace. Later that afternoon, Ryan found Adrian reviewing contracts inside the study. The room smelled of leather-bound books, cedar wood, and freshly brewed coffee. Ryan hesitated before speaking. "I saw Ethan with Vanessa again." Adrian did not immediately look up from the document in front of him. "I know," he replied calmly. "He enjoys her company." Ryan forced a light laugh. "Do you really think something like that could become serious?" Adrian slowly closed the folder and met Ryan's eyes with the calm authority that made even experienced executives choose their next words carefully. "I think seriousness begins the moment someone chooses to truly see another person." Ryan shifted uneasily. "She works here." Adrian nodded once. "She also happens to be intelligent, compassionate, dependable, and remarkably strong. Her profession tells me how she earns a living. It tells me nothing about her worth." Silence settled over the room. Ryan searched for another argument, but found none that sounded respectable once spoken aloud. That evening, Vanessa finished preparing the dining room before quietly leaving through the service entrance. Outside the mansion, Ethan waited beside his car with 2 cups of hot chocolate and a warm scarf folded across one arm. "It is colder tonight," he said as he handed her the scarf. "My grandmother would be disappointed if I let a friend walk home without one." Vanessa accepted it with grateful eyes. She realized then that Ethan had never tried to rescue her from loneliness. He had simply refused to treat her as though she deserved it. Somewhere on the second-floor balcony, Adrian watched them leave together with a faint smile. He knew the greatest victories rarely arrived through revenge. Sometimes they began the moment a person finally understood their own value and allowed someone worthy enough to recognize it too. Autumn arrived quietly in New York, covering the gardens of the Castellano estate with shades of gold and amber that shimmered beneath the afternoon sun. Life inside the mansion continued with its familiar rhythm, yet something subtle had changed. Vanessa no longer measured her worth by whether Ryan noticed her. Instead, she measured each day by the peace she felt when she looked into the mirror before leaving for work. She had enrolled in evening business classes at the local community college, spending every Tuesday and Thursday after her shift learning accounting and management. Her textbooks now rested beside her grandmother's framed photograph on the small table in her apartment, reminding her that every chapter she finished was another step toward the future she had once been too afraid to imagine. Ethan encouraged her without ever trying to control her choices. Sometimes he picked her up after class with 2 cups of hot chocolate. Other evenings, he simply sent a short message wishing her good luck before an exam. He celebrated her successes as though they belonged entirely to her, because in his mind they did. One crisp Thursday evening, Vanessa walked out of class, smiling after receiving the highest score in her accounting course. She found Ethan waiting outside beneath a street lamp, holding a paper bag from the same neighborhood bakery where they had first shared cinnamon rolls. "Congratulations," he said as he handed her a small blueberry pie. "You earned this." Vanessa laughed softly. "How did you know the results came out today?" Ethan smiled. "Because you mentioned it 3 weeks ago, and important days deserve to be remembered." Those simple words meant more than expensive jewelry ever could. Across town, Ryan sat alone inside an upscale restaurant after another long business meeting. His colleagues chatted about investments and upcoming charity galas, yet his attention drifted toward the large window overlooking the busy street. By chance, he saw Ethan and Vanessa walking together, carrying textbooks and laughing over something written inside one of her notebooks. There were no luxury cars, no glamorous events, and no dramatic displays of affection. They looked like 2 people genuinely enjoying each other's company. Ryan suddenly realized that everything he once claimed to value in a future wife already existed inside the woman he had dismissed. Her kindness had never changed. Her intelligence had always been there. Her quiet strength had simply gone unnoticed because he had never bothered to look beyond her uniform. The realization settled heavily on his heart. The following morning, Ryan arrived early at the Castellano estate, hoping to speak with Vanessa before everyone else appeared. He found her arranging fresh flowers in the main foyer beneath the grand staircase. Sunlight poured through the towering windows, surrounding her with warm golden light. "Vanessa," he said carefully. She turned with the same calm smile she offered every guest. "Good morning, Mr. Sullivan." Her voice carried no bitterness, only courtesy. Ryan hesitated, searching for words that suddenly felt much smaller than the mistake he had made. Before he could continue, Mrs. Evelyn Brooks called Vanessa to assist with arriving guests. She excused herself politely and walked away without anger, without tears, and without looking back. Ryan remained standing alone beneath the crystal chandelier, realizing that regret always arrives carrying perfect words after the right moment has already passed. From the second-floor balcony, Adrian watched the scene unfold in complete silence. He did not intervene because some lessons could never be taught by power. They had to be learned through loss. And for the first time, Ryan truly understood that he had not lost a chance because another man had taken it. He had lost it because he failed to recognize the extraordinary woman standing beside him when she had quietly offered him her heart. The annual Castellano Foundation Winter Charity Gala transformed the mansion into a sea of warm candlelight, polished crystal, and elegant music. Leaders from across New York filled the grand ballroom, while photographers quietly documented every handshake and every generous donation. Vanessa had spent 2 days helping prepare the event, making certain every table looked perfect before the first guest arrived. Yet this evening felt different from every celebration that had come before. She no longer walked with her eyes fixed on the floor. She still carried herself with humility, but confidence had quietly replaced uncertainty. She knew who she was now, and that knowledge could not be taken away by another person's opinion. Ethan arrived just before sunset wearing a tailored navy tuxedo that reflected his effortless style without appearing extravagant. As always, he entered through the service hallway first instead of the main entrance. He greeted the cooks, thanked the gardeners decorating the courtyard, and wished the housekeeping staff a pleasant evening before making his way toward the ballroom. When he found Vanessa placing the final arrangement of white roses near the staircase, he smiled warmly. "You always make this place feel like home," he said. Vanessa laughed softly. "The flowers deserve most of the credit." Ethan shook his head. "No. Flowers are beautiful because someone cares for them." Adrian happened to pass by just in time to hear the exchange. He paused for a moment before continuing toward the ballroom, saying nothing. Some conversations did not need witnesses. They simply needed honesty. Later that evening, Ryan approached Adrian near the marble fireplace where guests gathered between speeches. His expression carried the quiet exhaustion of a man finally ready to admit a painful truth. "Can we talk?" he asked. Adrian nodded once and led him into the private library overlooking the snow-covered gardens. The room was peaceful, lit by a glowing fireplace and shelves filled with leather-bound books collected over generations. Ryan stared out the window for several seconds before speaking. "I made the biggest mistake of my life." Adrian remained silent, allowing the confession to find its own pace. Ryan sighed deeply. "I judged Vanessa by her job instead of her character. I kept telling myself I wanted someone who was kind, loyal, intelligent, and genuine. She was all of those things. I simply refused to see them because I thought I deserved someone with a different title." Adrian folded his hands calmly. "You did not lose her because Ethan came along," he said quietly. "You lost her the day you decided her profession mattered more than her heart." Ryan lowered his head. There was no argument left to make. Adrian continued in the same measured voice. "Character is revealed in quiet moments. Vanessa showed hers every single day. You walked past it because you believed greatness always arrived wearing expensive clothes." The words settled into the room with gentle finality. Ryan closed his eyes for a brief moment before giving a slow nod. "I understand now." Adrian looked toward the ballroom, where music drifted softly through the open doors. "Understanding is valuable," he replied. "But sometimes it arrives after the opportunity has already become someone else's blessing." As they returned to the celebration, Ryan noticed Ethan standing beside Vanessa while she spoke with several charity volunteers about children's literacy programs. She smiled with the same warmth she had always carried, but tonight she stood taller than before. She was no longer waiting for someone else to decide whether she was worthy. She already knew that she was, and the people who truly mattered had finally learned to see it too. Snow continued to fall outside the tall windows of the Castellano estate, covering the gardens in a quiet blanket of white that softened every path and fountain. Inside, the charity gala had reached its most meaningful moment. Guests gathered around the grand staircase as volunteers, donors, and community leaders celebrated another successful year of helping local families. Vanessa stood near the entrance with several members of the household staff, believing she would quietly return to clearing tables once the speeches were finished. She had never expected to become part of the evening itself. Adrian stepped onto the stage and thanked everyone for their generosity before inviting several volunteers to join him. One by one they walked forward, smiling modestly as applause filled the ballroom. Then Adrian looked toward the back of the room. "There is one more person whose contribution deserves recognition," he said. Vanessa looked around, assuming he meant someone else. Mrs. Evelyn Brooks gently touched her arm. "He is speaking about you." The room grew still as dozens of faces turned in her direction. Vanessa hesitated, but Adrian offered an encouraging nod. She slowly walked toward the stage, her simple black maid's uniform standing in quiet contrast to the tuxedos and evening gowns surrounding her. Adrian smiled warmly. "For months, this estate has benefited from someone who never asked for praise, never sought attention, and never measured kindness by who was watching. She has reminded all of us that dignity is found in the smallest acts of service." The applause began softly before growing throughout the ballroom. Vanessa lowered her eyes, overwhelmed but composed. Before she could return to her place, Ethan stepped forward from the front row. His expression carried complete confidence, yet there was nothing theatrical about his movements. "There is something I would like everyone to know," he said. The ballroom became silent once again. Ethan looked at Vanessa before speaking to the guests. "The woman standing beside me is someone I deeply admire, not because of where she works, but because of who she is. Her kindness has changed my perspective. Her integrity has earned my respect, and I would be honored to continue building a future with her, if she will allow me." Vanessa looked at him with genuine surprise. She smiled through grateful eyes and gave the smallest nod. The audience responded with warm applause, not because they were witnessing a grand romantic gesture, but because they recognized two people treating each other with honesty and respect. Across the ballroom, Ryan quietly watched without resentment. For the first time, he understood that admiration built on character would always outlast attraction built on appearances. Adrian noticed Ryan's expression and saw not jealousy, but acceptance. Some lessons required disappointment before they became wisdom. As the orchestra began a gentle melody, Ethan offered Vanessa his hand. They walked together across the ballroom floor while conversations resumed around them. Nothing about the evening erased the hardships Vanessa had endured, yet everything about the moment affirmed that those hardships would no longer define her future. She was no longer waiting for someone else's approval to determine her value. She had discovered it within herself first, and that quiet confidence had changed the way the world responded to her. Spring arrived gently over the Castellano estate, replacing the last traces of winter with bright gardens, fresh blossoms, and warm sunlight spilling across the marble terraces. Life had changed in ways that no one could have imagined only a few months earlier. Vanessa still greeted every employee by name, still paused to help the gardeners arrange flowers before important events, and still believed that no task was beneath her if it made someone else's day a little easier. The difference was no longer found in her work. It was found in the way she carried herself. She no longer walked through the mansion hoping someone would recognize her worth. She already knew it. Ethan never tried to change that part of her. Instead, he encouraged every dream she had quietly postponed for years. When Vanessa completed her business certification with honors, he celebrated by inviting her grandmother, Mrs. Evelyn Brooks, Adrian, and the household staff to a small dinner at a neighborhood restaurant rather than an extravagant ballroom. The evening was filled with laughter, simple food, and genuine conversation. No one spoke about status or wealth. They spoke about perseverance, family, and the unexpected ways kindness could shape a life. Ryan also attended after receiving an invitation from Adrian. He approached Vanessa before dinner began, his expression calm and sincere. "I owe you an apology," he said. "Not because I expect anything in return, but because I finally understand the hurt my words caused." Vanessa listened quietly before offering a gentle smile. "Thank you for saying it," she replied. "I hope we both learned something valuable." There was no anger left between them, only acceptance. Some chapters ended without bitterness because both people chose to grow instead of holding on to regret. Adrian watched the exchange from across the room and felt a quiet sense of peace. He had spent years believing leadership meant protecting people through influence and authority. Vanessa had shown him another truth. Sometimes the greatest protection was creating an environment where every person was treated with equal dignity. Several weeks later, Adrian announced new educational scholarships for every employee working within the Castellano organization, believing opportunity should never depend on a person's starting point. Vanessa became one of the first recipients, not because she had asked for special treatment, but because her determination inspired a change that benefited everyone around her. On her final afternoon as a full-time housemaid, the staff gathered in the mansion gardens beneath blooming magnolia trees. Mrs. Evelyn Brooks embraced her warmly. The gardeners presented her with a small bouquet they had grown themselves, and the kitchen team surprised her with her favorite homemade pie. Ethan waited beside the front gate with the same quiet smile that had first made her feel truly seen. Vanessa looked back one last time at the estate that had witnessed her heartbreak, her healing, and her growth. It had once been the place where she questioned her value. Now it was simply the place where she discovered it. As she walked forward beside Ethan, Adrian remained on the front steps watching them disappear down the tree-lined drive. He smiled quietly, knowing that respect had accomplished what power never could. And on that beautiful spring afternoon, everyone who had witnessed Vanessa's journey remembered a simple truth that would outlive every title, every fortune, and every first impression. A person's profession may describe their work, but their character reveals who they truly are.